أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم إن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يؤتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كما أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملت أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالأرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في السور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم أن لا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لتمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نؤمره ننكس في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه شعرا وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحيي الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم فاتحة فاتحة
صلوات عاشور کی شب ہائے سکینہ کا وڑونا اور سید مظلوم کا بیٹی سے یہ کہنا ارے تو روئے میں یہ دیکھ نہیں سکتا سکینہ اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی کیا ہو کسی شب کو جو ہم گھر میں نہ آئے تم ہم کو نہ پاؤ تمہیں ہم بھی نہیں پائیں تڑپو گی نہیں درد سے وعدہ کرو بی بی پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی بیٹھا کرو کچھ دیر چراغوں کو بجھا کر سمجھا کرو اس خاک کو اے لاڈلی بستر بالی کبھی یوں ہی نہیں پہنا کرو بی بی پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی عادت ذرا تنہائی میں رہنے کی بھی ڈالو تصویر تصور میں اسیری کی بنا لو آزاد پرندوں کو نہ دیکھا کرو بی بی پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی اصغر کو نہ مانوس کرو پیار سے اپنے اکبر کی عروسی کے نہ دیکھا کرو سپنے صغرا کے قریب اتنا نہ بیٹھا کرو بی بی پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی صلوات
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Dr. Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani, respected elders, brothers and sisters in Imam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for the Salat Sawab of the marhumin listed on the screen and for all marhumin. Al-Fatiha. Imam Najibu is requested for the names listed on the screen and for all those that need here and elsewhere. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ يَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ 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 أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ يَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. Flu shot clinic. Masjid Hayy has once again coordinated flu shots for both men and women aged 18 and above. The vaccinations will be available at the Masjid tomorrow, Thursday, September 12th, starting at 8:30 p.m. Quran and Islamic Studies classes. Masjid Hayy is excited to announce the potential launch of Quran and Islamic Studies classes for all ages and for all age groups. We are looking to gauge interest from our community and would love your input. Our programs will feature engaging activities, hands-on learning, and much more to enrich the learning experience. Please take a few moments to answer a short survey that will be sent out in this week's newsletter, and you can go to the link shown on the screen. We look forward to hearing from you. At this time, I would like to call Dr. Shabbir Kirmani for tonight's lecture with a last Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل عليه وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى صدق الله العلي العظيم زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman here in Florida, across the globe, wherever you may be hearing my voice, Salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question, what is true understanding? When we come to the era in time, the 800s to the 1100 ADs, you'll find that this is a very interesting dynamic in the history of society and the times. And the Imam, who we are here to commemorate, the father of the Imam of our time, he gives us some very important lessons that we can learn from. Living, although a short span of time from the Zahiri perspective, we learn some valuable lessons by understanding how this Imam taught us to navigate the difficult, turmoil, tumultuous times, whether they are political times, social times, economic times that are tumultuous, how to navigate them in a way that you can preserve your iman and also protect yourself, your community, and your broader society. How does this Imam show us a different procedure, a different methodology than perhaps other Imams, and how it's so vital? To understand this and the lessons that we learn about our world today, I want to look at a few things with you. Number one, the idea of what is going on during the time of Imam al-Askari. What was going on concurrent, just prior to, just after, and around the time of his life globally. And what does that tell us about the world? Number two, what was happening internally with the Muslim world at that time? And why is that important and significant to understand the context of the life of Imam Askari? The third element is, how did the Imam teach people for that time how to understand their society, their zaman and makan, and by understanding that, how should they take action accordingly? How can this give us some insight, especially looking at our world, especially after last night's debate? Understanding what is the world turning to, and how can that Imam's time actually give us some solid guidance for today's time. And finally, of course, we'll connect our hearts and our minds to the tragedy of the Imam by giving condolences to the Imam of our time, by reflecting on his martyrdom, and ultimately reminding ourselves of our allegiance to Islam by virtue of the Imam. This is our agenda for tonight. Wherever you are here in Florida or across the globe, send a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the first level, if you're looking at the life of Imam al-Askari, he's living approximately 200 years after Rasulullah's hijrah, so in the Islamic calendar. And you'll find that he's living in the Gregorian calendar, as we'd call it, roughly 844 or so. He's born and he's living during this time. So this is the era of the Abbasids, of course, in the Muslim domain. And as you know, historically, especially as we discussed, if you remember, the discussion on the life of the 8th Imam, Imam al-Rida, who we just commemorated a few nights ago, if you relate that to what's going on in this Imam's time, you'll get a deeper understanding of what's going on there. So during the time of Imam al-Rida, you'll find that the center is Baghdad, and then eventually it moves to Tus in modern-day Iran. And now there's another movement that's going on where the Abbasids move to another location, which we'll discuss momentarily. At the same time, what's going on in the world globally? At this time, in Arabia or in the Muslim world, it's the Abbasids that are ruling. Prior to them are the Umayyads. Now recall that flourishing of intellect, technology, mathematics, sciences, and these things are going on. But now, as we're coming to the time of Imam Askari, there is some internal political turmoil that is taking place in the Abbasids era, which we'll come to momentarily. Number one. Number two, it's the era in Europe of the Vikings. You know, the Vikings who are in, for example, modern Scandinavian countries, they say they were from Norway and the likes, and these nations. They were conquering many parts of Europe. For example, they were conquering at this time the British Isles, so they had come to what we would eventually call England. They had conquered it and they would basically plunder it, and they would eventually take over places and settle in places like York, and other places that they established bases. If you look at what's going on in Europe, recall during the time of the lecture of the 8th Imam we mentioned, in Europe is the era of Charlemagne. Charlemagne is called the father of Europe because he's the one who essentially, they say, united Europe. Now, even in Charlemagne's domain at this time, there's turmoil. So Charlemagne has now died by the time of Imam Askari. When Charlemagne dies, his terrain is divided into three amongst his sons. One of them is the eastern corridor, the western corridor, and then the central. Eastern, western, and central. And the idea is one of them, Francia, east and west, and then the central region. One of them became Germany eventually, one of them eventually became France, and one of them eventually became modern-day Italy. And eventually what happened as a result of this is they started dividing further, and then fractions formed of Europe, which we now eventually call the European Union, fast forward to today's day and age. In China, you have the Tang dynasty that's there, and that Tang dynasty is something that is noteworthy, especially you'll notice the ebb and flow of it throughout times. Why am I mentioning all of this to you? Similarly, we learn lessons from these eras that give us practical insight and guidance. Why? Sayyid Khamenei has written a book which I invite you to consider reading, in which he called, the title is very interesting. The title is The 250-Year-Old Man. 250-year-old man, what? Is this Nuh? Nuh lived longer than that, but is this supposed to be someone who's one individual? No. He's saying if you look at the lives of the Imams, they are different individuals, but their message and methodology and goal is the same. So when you look at this individual, these different 12 Imams, in some sense you can actually look at them as one Rasulullah, for example. As Rasulullah said, awwaluna Muhammad wa akhiruna Muhammad wa awsatuna Muhammad wa kulluna Muhammad. So this is to look at different eras and phases of the same individual. So this Imam, although he only lived roughly 28 years of life, he gives us some valuable insights on how we could navigate tumultuous times. So now comes the second point. What was going on during the time of the Abbasids? The Abbasids, and this is something that we as a society need to be careful of, from the local level to the top. You need to be very careful of playing with fire. You know, we tell children, be careful, don't play with fire, because you could get burnt, right? So something like this happened with the Abbasids. The Abbasids hired Turkish mercenaries. You know mercenaries? Killers for hire. So they will pay you, and when we pay you, you kill on our behalf, and you are our military, essentially. Military for hire. Still happens today. Anyways, now when things are going well, when you have all your budget and you have the money and your books are all good and you're able to pay the mercenaries on time, they're happy, you're happy, everything's good. But as soon as you start getting late with payments, mercenaries become a big problem. And so this is what had happened. The Abbasids invited these mercenaries into Baghdad. When they were in Baghdad, they were great in the beginning for the Abbasid rule. They were hitmen for hire, they were the muscle for hire, so to speak. But eventually, when the payments started getting delayed, they had no regard for anything. And I can't mention what was going on from up and down at that time. So then the Abbasids said, hold on a second, we need to do something. We need to do what? We need to move. So they moved their capital from Baghdad to Samarra, also known as Surriman Ra'a. Surriman Ra'a literally meaning a beauty to the eyes, a view to behold, so to speak. A beautiful scene, a beautiful view. So they moved it. Well, this was a garrison town. This was a barracks town. This was a town where the people who were there before the move of the Abbasids were all military men, generals, and this was the military hub of the Abbasids. Why did they move it there? One of the reasons was protection. Another was the city was not somewhere you could really stay safely, and they had a concern that there would be a revolution and a revolt. So now they are in a state of tremendous, the Abbasid rulers are in a state of tremendous paranoia. And they're very afraid of anything, any force that could topple them. It could be the Turkish mercenaries, it could be even the Ahlul Bayt, which they kept a very, very strong eye on during this time and this period. This is also something very noteworthy that you'll find in terms of what was going on here and what was also going on in the history of Europe. And this will come up, this is the third point. You'll find that if you read in the history of Europe, you can't understand, as in I can't and we can't fully understand and appreciate the West until we understand the history of France and the French Revolution. And one of the things that they mark as the start of the French Revolution is 1789, the storming of the Bastille. The storming of the Bastille was their, essentially it was a fort that is in France, and this fort was a symbol of the military power that was built during the 100-Year War. Now you may say, why am I saying this? The whole purpose of all this history is to try to show that those same challenges that were going on then are still going on today, but if we learn from them, we can learn the lessons of history. So now what happened was eventually, there was such a disconnect between the monarchy, the French that were ruling France, and the general populace, that they would just throw anyone into jail. And eventually that Bastille became a prison. Similarly, if you look at the symbolism here, and you relate it to the symbolism of what was going on during the Abbasids, it was similar in the sense that Imam Ali tells us that a leader should be on the basis of someone who understands the complaints of people. He would tell Malik, listen to the grievances of people. He would even tell the first three Khulafa, listen to the grievances of people. Example, he told Uthman, you are not listening to people's grievances, they have grievances with you. And we know eventually, when you don't listen to people's grievances and they suppress it, then it comes out like lava. And when it comes out like lava, it's not always good. So the Imam would say, listen to people's understanding and try to incorporate it and address their issues. So the same thing is going on during these times where the Abbasids are sort of running away from the challenges. So now, at this junction, the Imam is here, the third level. So the Imam is here. And when the Imam is here, he is in such an environment that and it may teach you and I something about what's going on in our world today. His circumstance was, and this is what the Imam told his companions, believers, there was such heavy surveillance on Imam al-Askari that they would see wherever he's going, wherever he's coming, whatever is going on. And in that environment, how did he hide in plain sight and still propagate and give us lessons? This is where it comes in. So the Imam, if a Shia would see him, he would be escorted by people and spies were looking left, right, and center. And in this environment, eventually, if a Shia he was telling his Shia, Imam al-Askari, that if you ever see me in public, do not even say salam to me. Don't look at me. What? Ibn Rasulullah, like for you and I, if we could see the Imam of our time, we'd be so enlightened, we'd be so happy, we'd be so, we'd be wanting to meet the Imam. But the Imam said, don't. Why? He said, I'll go away and they won't bother me. They already have me under surveillance, but the problem will be for you. You'll be in a difficulty. They'll come after your family, they'll come after you, they'll destroy your livelihood, they'll destroy your life. This is an interesting juxtaposition between the stand and the take of Imam al-Askari and the stand of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Are they at odds? No. They're not at odds. Why? Because of the zaman and makan are different. The time and the space are different. The needs are different. The environment's different. So one of the lessons that we learn from the different Imams is it's important to consider the environment. It's important to consider different tactics as well. The Imam was in a situation where he's looking at that, will Shiaism survive? Imam Hussein alayhi salam, 72 went to Karbala. It was more than that, but whatever the number you take historically, these people went to Karbala. But there were many people who didn't go with Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And in that, Imam knew that still the message will carry on through my sister Zainab eventually. But in the situation with the Abbasids, Shiaism itself may cease to exist if the Shias come out openly and they're butchered and massacred. Look, there's bloodbaths on the front. By any means, anyone's willing to take anyone's life in that state, in that environment. So now, in this environment, the Imam says, number one, don't say salam to me if you see me in public. It'll become a big problem for you. So what happened when we were supposed to fight publicly all the time? You know, this is complex. It's coming to the full front today, as in the full thing is coming circle. What do I mean? You know, sometimes there are things that are for our community at the general consensus, and there's something that are khassa. There's something that khassa and amma. Similarly, with the Imams, there were some things they used to say generally to the general public, and there are some things they used to say to their close companions. Similarly, in our communities, there are challenges that we're facing nationally, internationally, and globally and locally. I'll give you an example. Especially when you travel, you learn and see these perspectives. It reminds you. I can tell you several jamaats and communities and imam bargas in Canada, in America, in other parts of the world. Sometimes they've been trying to get zoning for their imam barga, their center, or things of that nature. Not for a year or two, for several years. And sometimes these go to a vote, sometimes for the city commission, or it goes to a vote. And in that environment, what happens sometimes is, eventually, people look at all of the different dynamics. And sometimes we get short-sighted and we look there. The general community may be looking at the short term about what's going on in the world and say, we need to address that. But that can jeopardize the long-term journey of what's been going on for, behind the scenes. I'm not telling you which is right. What I'm saying is complexity. Keep this point in mind. It will come back in a second when we talk about how the Imam gave guidance. So now in this environment, in this circumstance, the Imam says, number one, don't say salam ring. Number two, the Shias were known to wear the ring on their right hand. The ring, their rings. Imam said, don't wear it on the right, wear it on your left. Wear it on your left. Shias are known to wear it on their right. In that environment, the Imam said that during that circumstance, the dynamic shift. Taqiyya is not something that is just at one era. There's all eras, or eras of taqiyya have different times. And sometimes the Imams emphasize that in order to protect and survive. And there's a very legitimate reason as to why it is. In fact, you and I, perhaps, if you know the history of Shi'ism, maybe we wouldn't be able to call ourselves Shi'as if you knew how much bloodbath had happened and taqiyya was not something that was held near and dear. So now comes the element of how did the Imam propagate and what lesson did he give? And I think this would solve many of the world's problems if people understood the philosophy of what the Imam had said here. In this era, now at the fourth level, there's a man by the name of Al-Kindi, Ishaq Al-Kindi. He's considered the biggest scholar of the time. And at that time, he had written a book called Contradictions in the Quran. Contradictions in the Quran. That is, the Quran's seemingly what he's saying is mistakes. One thing is saying one thing, the other is saying another. They're at odds. They're going in the different directions. For example, what? For example, Allah says, for example, that He made the heavens and the earth in sittati ayyam, in 6 days. Ayyam, as you know in the context for us, it means not just day, it means epoch, era. So it's not just the literal day, morning to evening. So in this context. But people say, God said in 6 days. But in Surah Fussilat, He says something differently seemingly. Says, for example, 2 days plus 4 days plus 2 days, seeming like 8 days, if you take the literal interpretation. So it seems like a conflict or contradiction. Or another example that people, especially Orientalists, have said about seemingly contradictions in the Quran is they'll say, for example, Ya Ukhta Harun, where the Quran says, O sister of Aaron, whereas is in reference to Maryam alayhi salam. And so they say, hold on, where is Musa's time and where is Isa's time? Where is Aaron's time and where is the time of Maryam? And the reality is, when they look at this, they make a few errors in this. Number one, Ukhta Harun, as you know, this was a statement historically that the Jewish community or the Banu Israel would say, a saintly person, a person who was a pious person. As a figure of speech, they would say, Ukhta, or Akhi, sister of or brother of Aaron. It was symbolic thing to say this is a pious person. Similarly, the Hebrews in Banu Israel, they used to say son of God. They used to say son of God. But son of God in their mind, in their context, in their belief, meant something totally different. It meant someone who was a saint, someone who's a holy person, someone who's a spiritual person. That context was lost, and it was translated into the New Testament, and eventually people began to say this means literal son of God. That context is very important. And that's not what Jesus ever said. That's why Newton and many other Christians said Jesus never said he was son of God. This is why history, context, and environment is very important. So now, eventually, so the responses are there for this, whereas, for example, number one, that was any holy person was called Ukhta Harun or Akhi of Harun or something like that. Number one. Number two is there's a difference between Maryam and Miriam. Miriam is the sister of Aaron, one of the prophetesses of Judaism. Maryam is the mother of Jesus. And number three is who said that that's the same one that you're referring to. So understanding that context answers a lot of the questions. Now comes the issue. Al-Kindi, during the time of this Imam, he wrote a book called Contradictions in the Quran. So the Imam, with one of his gatherings of his khassa, his close companions, he said, why don't any of you respond to Al-Kindi? He said, you know, he's written this book. This book has so much detail, so much information, so much seemingly contradiction to the Quran. Why don't any of you respond? By the way, Imam Askari, there's a tafsir of Imam Askari himself, right? Our ulama are split on it. Some say it's partially authentic, others say it's not. In the ones who say that it's authentic, partially at least, there are big names, such as Sheikh Saduq, for example. For example, there's Allama Majlisi's own father, for example. And then there's others who say, no, it's not authentic. Many other modern scholars say that no, it's not. And these are important things to consider. I'm laying this out for you to understand. Sometimes you may go on Tafsir al-Askari and you may find it online or something, and you say, oh, this is from Imam Askari, I can take whatever is there. You have to know the methodology of a book. Even Nahjul Balagha, although it is authentic as per our scholars, no doubt, but what was the goal of Sayyid Rabi when he was compiling Nahjul Balagha? When he was compiling it, his goal was to, for example, compile all of the works and put all the works of Imam Ali under one roof that had one very specific criteria. And that very specific criteria was he wanted those works and those lines and those statements of Imam Ali alayhi salam that are the most, that if a Christian, a Jewish Arab, a Christian Arab, an atheist Arab, anybody who spoke the Arabic language who was not Muslim, even if they read it, they would say this is phenomenal. But you know how I can play with this? I'm saying this in an era where sometimes today, either side is not showing the whole picture. And what's happening is people go to their extremes to explain and justify their own perspectives. So what ends up happening is they give a mixed, distorted image of what is reality. So what am I saying here? What I'm saying here is someone may say, oh, there's no sanad in Nahjul Balagha. And it's true. It never says this person said, this person said, this person said, this person said. So you'll never hear our maraji and our scholars saying, because Nahjul Balagha says it, therefore it's there. But that doesn't mean that Nahjul Balagha is not authentic. It's authentic, it just has a very different goal. Number one. Number two, Biharul Anwar. You will never hear any of our scholars saying it is written in Bihar, therefore I am giving this fiqhi istidlal. Why? Biharul Anwar by Allama Majlisi, written over about 450 years ago, Biharul Anwar is 120 volumes. 110 volumes is official. I mean, there's more volumes that aren't allowed to be published, but those are volumes, not pages. 110 official volumes. Was the goal of Allama Majlisi to get only authentic ones? No. His goal was to get all of the traditions of our corpus under one roof. There's also a historical reason as to why that was important. The reason that was historically important was, if you know Shiaism, you know that there was 400 books. We used to have Arba'a Mi'a books that were canonical ahadith and literature books. They were burnt and we lost many of them. But then that boiled down to the four kutubah, the four main canonical books, kutubah Arba'a. Anyways, Imam said, answer, get the answer from Al-Kindi. Why don't you answer him? Why don't you respond? Say, Ibn Rasulullah, how can we respond? He said, I'll tell you. Go to him and ask him a question. I'll tell you what question to ask him. And so one of the individuals came, of the Imam, and he built a relationship with al-Kindi. At that time, when you write a work like this, it's your life's work, it's your magnum opus. You spend the whole day, night trying to write this, and you write it in ink, and you preserve it, and you try to protect it. So he was in a situation in this environment where you had to build a relationship. You know, even today, if you go to universities, there's TAs, RAs, and research assistants, teachers' assistants. Eventually, what happened is, the circumstance was, this person went to al-Kindi, and he said, I will work for you, I will brush for you, like, I'll sweep for you, I'll give you tea, I'll be an apprentice to you, just give me the ability to learn knowledge from you. So I said, okay. One day passed, 2 days passed, they built this relation, developed the relationship. Eventually, when he develops a relationship, the Imam said, ask him the following question. And so he remembered the question, and he said, my teacher, you've written this book, Contradictions in the Quran. He said, yes. He said, I have a question for you. He said, yes. He said, this is your work, your life's work? He said, yes, it's my life's work. He said, can I ask you a question? He said, yes. What's the question? He says, is it possible that an author writes a book, someone writes a work, someone writes an essay, someone writes a book, someone writes something, and somebody else reads it, and that person who reads it, they understand something different than what the author meant? Is it possible? That the author has one niyyah, and the person who read it, they understand something else. Is it possible? He said, who gave you this question? You know, it's possible in our world, right? Sometimes we misunderstand people. I'll give you a quick example. I've been to France twice, right? First time people do the touristy thing, second times you see other parts. So one thing that you'll notice, if you go to, for example, Montreal in Canada, you'll go to France as well, sometimes people who speak English, they'll say, you know, they should speak, we expect people should speak English because we speak English. And so sometimes we find that sometimes people, when we speak, start automatically speaking to English to other people, we sometimes get, you know, people don't reciprocate. Even if they know English, they may not reciprocate and respond to you immediately in English. And sometimes we perceive that as rude. But have you thought about it from their perspective? They may say, and they do say, some say, like, why are you so arrogant to think that we should speak your language? Why don't you speak our language? Or why don't you at least attempt to speak our language? Like, we take it for granted because of colonialism and many other things, and we just say that, you know, hey, we should. And the reality is, well, who gave us that framework? Where did that come from? And so this is important to understand different perspectives. So he says, al-Kindi, the student says to al-Kindi, is it possible you derive one thing and the other person derives anything? That's why I and many other people that I learned from would always say, मैं जो कह रहा हूँ मैं उसका जिम्मेदार हूँ, जो आप समझ रहे हैं उसके जिम्मेदार आप हैं, या मैं जो कह रहा हूँ मैं उसका जिम्मेदार हूँ, जो आप समझ रहे हैं उसका जिम्मेदार मैं नहीं हूँ. Meaning what? I can say something and what I have intended is very different from what you understand. You know, for example, I'll say something, and many times people say, are we talking about this, or were you giving shade to this, or were you, for example, pitching at this, or were you giving a slight jab to someone? And I'm like, I didn't even think of that in my mind, but they connected it somehow. Sometimes I am, but sometimes I'm not. And so the understanding is very different. So he said, al-Kindi says, where did you get this from? He said, no, I just thought of it. He said, no, I know you. You know, teachers know their students many times. They say, I know your capability. You've been coming here for a while. I know your caliber. I know your ability. This is not from you. Why? Because this has stumped me, and it's absolutely true. It's very possible that one person has one intent, the other person derives a different meaning, and there's a misinterpretation, misunderstanding. Today, for example, what's a very famous example of this? Gun violence in America. Guns in America is a huge problem. People, unfortunately, children are dying in schools. And people use the Second Amendment and they say the right to bear arms. Absolutely, there's the right to bear arms. However, despite presidential candidates saying they have guns and their running mates have guns and all of these things, the initial goal was that so military power is not consolidated amongst the governments as it was in Europe. And so the populace didn't have that. So there were militias at that time that were there to defend the city and defend the towns and defend the people. In defense. Not to arm teachers and not to arm people and cause more violence eventually. So context is really important. So this same issue is going on. At that time, the Imam said, look, is it possible? And Al-Kindi said, absolutely. But you didn't get, this is not your question. So who gave it to you? Tell me the truth. He said, it was my master, Imam Hassan al-Askari, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He drained his entire book into the river and he eventually changed his views. So this lesson is very vital, that if sometimes, family-wise, community-wise, in the broader sense of society at large, we sometimes misinterpret people's perspectives, but until we genuinely ask and be with an open and sincere heart, we won't get to the truth. And so the Imam teaches us the take-home lessons. Sometimes, maybe silence is good. Sometimes, having a long-term view is also good. Recall, some of the Imams sowed the seeds for the future. Recall that the people who eventually became the Nawab or the Naibs of the Imam of our time in Ghaibat al-Sughra were first the deputies of the 11th Imam. Those establishments had already been made. So there were many things that the 11th Imam was doing during his own life that were far down the road. And you'll notice this also during the time of Imam al-Kadhim and many other Imams. Sometimes when the environment around you is so difficult, the Ahlul Bayt show us that maybe you build somewhat for your society, but you also build for those who come down the road. Your children, your grandchildren, and those. Maybe they will be able to have a different environment. Nonetheless, tonight we take our hearts and our minds to Surah Man Ra'a Samara, and we give condolences to the Imam of our time, the 12th Imam. As you know, the Imam al-Askari also had two brothers, one by the name of Ja'far, one by the name of Muhammad, or Sayyid Muhammad, who is buried in Balad. This Sayyid Muhammad, the brother of Imam al-Askari, the uncle of the Imam of our time, is someone who is very mujarrab because he went through such difficulties, but he was a tremendously pious person. That one of the things that we are told is that hajat are granted through his door, to the tawassul of him towards Allah, especially those who are not having children. And you'll find that many times some people have the most difficulty conceiving. It's through the tawassul of this individual that they've been granted children. Sometimes I've heard 15, 20 personal stories that I know people were not having. There's a barakah in these personalities. Nonetheless, eventually the Abbasids said, their paranoia got to the level that they said, we cannot have him around. We cannot have this individual around anymore. We need to get rid of him. So they began to make the arrangements for the poisoning of Imam al-Askari. This Imam who was poisoned and his life was taken. Eventually the Imam who's of the Imam of our time, Imam al-Zaman, he's roughly 5 years of time. Through Ghaib, through the Ajaz, he comes and he makes the arrangements and he helps. They say that the deputy of the Imam was the one who was Zahiri there, who was helping with the arrangements. But the person who was instructing was the Imam, and the ones who made the final arrangements was Imam Zaman himself. Eventually, this Imam al-Askari was given ghusl, he was given kafan, he was buried. In fact, the land in which he is buried, that was purchased by the Imam when he was forcefully moved into Samarra. That is his land. Eventually, the Imam was buried there, and he was given his ghusl and his kafan at that moment. Eventually, this is his tragedy, this short life. But ajrukum ala Allah. Azadaru, do jumle sun lijiye. Ye Imam Zaman hai, jo hamare Imam hai, is daur ke Imam hai. Unke walid girami is dunya se kooch kar rahe hain, is dunya se ja rahe hain. Zehre daga ne asar kiya, Imam ne ghusl ka bhi ihtimam kiya, kafan ka bhi ihtimam kiya. Magar main salam kahunga is Imam par, aur yaqinan main salam कहूँगा इमाम ज़माना पर, क्योंकि जब उन्होंने अपने बाबा को गुस्ल व कफन दिया होगा तो ज़रूर शुहदाए करबला, सैयद शुहदा इमाम हुसैन याद आए होंगे. इमाम ज़माना खुद ज़ियारत नहिया में कहते हैं, ज़ियारत नहिया जो पूरा एक मुकम्मल मरसिया है, इमाम ज़माना कहते हैं सलाम हो मेरे उस जद पर कि मैं सुबह और रात दोपहर शाम मैं रोता हूँ, और जब मेरे आंसू खुश्क हो जाते हैं तो फिर मैं खून रोता हूँ, मैं खून गिरिया करता हूँ. उनके सामने क्या मंजर होगा जो इमाम ज़माना पे गुजर गई, जो इमाम हुसैन पर गुजर गई. सलाम हो इमाम अस्करी पर, सलाम हो इमाम हुसैन पर, और सलाम हो इमाम ज़माना पर. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، صلى الله عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. ماتم حسين يا حسين حسين.
یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم. سب مل کے مومن کی ہے ماتم کرو شبیر کا، ہے زینب دلگیر کا، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی. یہ داغ نہیں لوگو یہ معجزہ ماتم کا، یہ داغ نہیں لوگو یہ معجزہ ماتم کا، سینے پہ لکھی میری کربل کی کہانی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی. غازی کا علم لے کے بازار میں آئے ہیں، غازی کے علم لے کے بازار میں آئے ہیں، روداد اسیروں کی دنیا کو سنانی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی. زینب نے شروع کی تھی زنداں میں عزاداری، زینب نے شروع کی تھی زنداں میں عزاداری، صدیوں سے چلی آئی یہ ریت پرانی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی. آئی ہے صدا اب بھی کربل کی فضاؤں سے، آتی ہے صدا اب بھی کربل کی فضاؤں سے، شبیر حقیقت میں اسلام کے معنی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی ہے، شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی. دے پرسا 72 کا زہرا کے لٹے گھر کا، دے پرسا 72 کا زہرا کے لٹے گھر کا ہر سال محرم میں یہ یاد دلانی ہے ماتم کرو شبیر کا ہے زینب دلگیر کا شبیر تیرا ماتم مومن کی نشانی ہے شبیر تیرا ماتم سورۃ المبارکۃ الفاتحہ زیارت السلام علیک یا رسول اللہ السلام علیک یا امیر المؤمنین السلام علیک یا فاطمۃ الزہراء سیدتی نساء العالمین السلام علیک یا خدیجۃ الکبریٰ السلام علیک یا حسن المجتبیٰ السلام علیک یا ابا عبداللہ الحسین وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذريتك علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن عجل الله فرجه وسهل الله مخرجه وظهوره السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ اللہم کل ولیک الحجت ابن الحسن صلواتک علیہ وعلی آبائه فی هذه الساعة وفی کل ساعة ولیا وحافظا وقائدا وذلیلا وعینا حتی تسکنہ ارضک طوعا وتمتعہ فیہا طویلا برحمتک یا ارحم الراحمین